And I got to ask you, Jerry, with you being, feuding with him after all, those couple years, does Andy Kaufman deserve to be in WWE Hall of Fame?
Well, I think that without a doubt he does. I guess, and probably the main drawback or the main holdup or resistance to that is the fact that Andy never had a match in the WWE. But I think there's some people there's definitely a place for Andy, at least in the celebrity of the WWE Hall of Fame, because that match that Andy and I had is just it almost supersedes any organization. It was just about wrestling in general. If you look back and really consider all the facts, that match was so important in what evolved, or the way wrestling evolved after. I think, and a lot of people have told me, that it's like that was the beginning of sports entertainment, because that was the first time that wrestling and the entertainment world collided head to head and then wound up working together. As a matter of fact, that's the reason I got hooked up with Andy to begin with, because Andy grew up in Long Island, New York. He was a big wrestling fan, from the days when he was just a kid. He watched TV and watched. I remember him telling me that his favorite wrestler was, the Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, and he said it used to amaze him that he could tell that Nature Boy Buddy Rogers was going on television and intentionally trying to make people despise him, intentionally trying to make everybody hate him, but yet he was still popular. And Andy's told me that mentality, that way of thinking, followed, or he used that when he got into show business. I mean, that was Andy's modus of operation in all the shows that he did. He loved to tick the audience off. He loved to ruffle their feathers. He didn't want to go out there and make people laugh. He was not a comedian. He told me 100 times, "Hey, I'm not a comedian. I've never told a joke in my life. I really wish you wouldn't refer to me as a comedian." And what he was in reality was a performance artist. And he loved to do bits or shtick that would surprise the audience or shock them or make them upset or make them angry. And so that's what came about once he had that celebrity from being on the TV show Taxi. He wanted to then live out a childhood fantasy of being a bad guy wrestler. He even said that on the Letterman show. He said, "Hey, I just went down to Memphis and was playing a bad guy wrestler." And that's what Andy wanted to do. And as I said, he grew up in Long Island, New York. And early on there, he went to one of the shows, one of the WWE shows at that time, of course, WWF. He went to one of their shows there in New York, and he approached Vince McMahon Sr., and he introduced himself, said, "Hey, I'm Andy Kaufman on the TV show Taxi, and I've been doing some." He had already started wrestling women in his, nightclub acts and all of this sort of thing. And he had already started the intergender wrestling champion and all of that. So he approached Vince McMahon Sr. with the idea of wrestling women at one of the WWE shows. And, he said, he told Vince then, he said, I'm doing I've done it on Saturday Night Live. I've done it in the Merv Griffin show, and I've done it in comedy clubs and nightclubs. And he said, but I've never done it in front of a wrestling audience. And he said, I just want to see how it would be received in front of wrestling fans. And so that was his proposition to Vince McMahon Sr. And in retrospect, lucky for me, Vince Sr. turned him down because, at that time, there wasn't any thought of wrestling and entertainment being intertwined. And Vince told him, he said, I appreciate the offer, Andy, but our fans are so skeptical. And he said, I just am hesitant to involve a Hollywood actor with our wrestling because I'm afraid that the fans will think, they're all actors. And so the fact that Vince Sr. turned Andy down on his proposal, it's the way Andy wound up in my lap, because, as you said, Bill Apter was a friend of mine, and Bill was a magazine photographer, and writer for the national wrestling magazines at the time, and he was always at the shows in New York, and he knew Andy. And when Andy told him about his idea, and when he told him that Vince had turned him down, then Bill Apter told Andy, he said, "Hey, you know what? I have a friend of mine, Jerry Lawler. He and Jerry Jarrett own a wrestling company down in Memphis, Tennessee, and they do big shows at the Memphis Mid-South Coliseum every week." He said, "Let me give you Jerry's number." And he said, "I think that they would be interested in doing it." And Andy said, "Oh, my gosh, that's great." So I first got a call the next day from Bill Apter, and Bill said, "Jerry, you know Andy Kaufman?" And I said, "Well, I don't know him, but sure, I've seen him. He's on Taxi. He's Latka, on Taxi every week." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, he's going to call you today. He wants to come down to Memphis and wrestle some women." And I thought it was a joke. I said, "Oh, okay, sure, Bill. Yeah, I'm sure he will." And he said, "I'm serious." And he said, "I'm a friend of his." And then he told me the story of what happened, the night before in New York. And sure enough, hour or so later, I get a call from Andy Kaufman, and he gave the same pitch, I guess, that he gave Vince McMahon Sr. And man, I jumped at it immediately because, I mean, here, we're down in Memphis, and as Andy would say, we're a bunch of hillbilly from down in Memphis, Tennessee. And so the thought, it was really true almost, because it was like the thought of, oh my gosh, here's a big Hollywood star. At the time, Taxi was the #1 TV show in the nation, And I said, here's a big Hollywood star wants to come to Memphis and wrestle at one of our shows. Oh my gosh. So we jumped at the chance to have him come down, and that's how that's how the whole thing got started. And that's why I believe that Andy would definitely be deserving of a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame, because that match, I don't even know if there is a more famous wrestling match in itself that they've made movies about it. They've it's been talked about on countless number of interviews, television, radio, everything you can talk about, everything you can think of, for 35 years.
Yeah.
I mean, what other wrestling match can you think of? And I'm saying this match has been talked about for 35 years, but not just by wrestling fans. I mean, you can go and find people on the street that have never watched wrestling, but they knew about that wrestling match. You didn't have to be a wrestling fan to hear about that, because it made national publicity all over the country that Andy was hospitalized in a wrestling match. And so I think that just the fact, the notoriety of that match alone would warrant Andy being in the WWE Hall of Fame.